Back in 1943, when I was but 10 years old at that time, going on 11, the FBI came to our home and ransacked our home under the auspices of doing search, looking for contraband and propaganda, which they found none of. And then in November of '44, they arrested my father at work. We had no idea where he was at. They arrested him on a Friday. We had no idea where he was at until Monday, and all during that weekend my mother cried and wailed at the window waiting for my father to come home. And then so he was taken to Ellis Island, New York Harbor, and from while he was there, my family, my mother and I and my brother went out to visit him. And then in February, the end of February, my mother and my brother and I went out to Ellis Island, and we were locked up there as well. We spent a couple of 3 months there, and from there we went to Crystal City, Texas, an internment camp for families. And at this camp there were Japanese Americans, German Americans, and German Latin Americans, as well as a few Italian Americans. And this camp was for families. We had schools there, playgrounds, swimming pools, and that sort of thing. It was a new experience for me. We were escorted by guards from the Immigration and Naturalization Service on a train to Uvalde, Texas, from Uvalde, Texas down to Crystal City on a bus, and there we were. And so that became my new home for a while. At this camp, it was a different life from Brooklyn, New York, you know, lights and asphalt and concrete. And now we're suddenly out in the middle of the southwestern Texas desert, short ways from Mexico and 140 miles from San Antonio, and it became a new life that you had to cope with. And my coping was I went to school. I went to German school. I had no idea why I was going to the German school. I learned later when we left there in December of '45. We got there in May of '45, and then so I had to overcome many things. One is to learn the German language, which I didn't know. I knew a few words, but I had to learn the German language, and I had to make new friends. And I made friends with Japanese as well as German Latin Americans, and spend most of my time swimming in the swimming pool every morning early because it was nice, the weather was beautiful. I mean, to me it was. It wasn't to older people because it was hot and humid, but to a child that's no big deal. It was more humid than Arizona, but just as hot. And so from that experience, I kept myself busy in this camp constantly, and going to school and learning the language. And there was much of the culture I couldn't get accustomed to. My teacher wanted me to write with my right hand. I was a left-hander. I reported that to my father, and my father went down there and told the teacher, hey, this was America. He'll write with whatever hand he wants to. And so that got that squared away. And then we, like I say, we got there in May, and then on 1st of December, we headed back to Ellis Island. At Ellis Island, I've been there before for a couple of months, March and April. And so that was not a new experience to me, but it still was strange and odd. We were bunked, my brother and I were bunked with, actually our beds were with adult males in a big open bay, and some of those males had been there for 3 or 4 years, and my father said, just watch out for these guys, this and this. So we were always cautious. While we were there, it's another case of where you had to be occupied. I made many macrame belts on this go-around when we were there out of small cords and weaving different kinds of knots and so on and so forth. And so we were there this time. We got there the 1st of December, and we stayed there until the middle of January. January 17th, 1946, we left. And we boarded this ship called the SS Aiken Victory, and we're on our way to Bremerhaven, Germany. My father decided he was going to repatriate. He was under threat of deportation, so he took the least of the alternatives. And this ship voyage was a 10-day voyage where I met John Kincaid as one of the merchant sailors who befriended my brother and I, and we went to Bremerhaven, Germany. And when we got to Bremerhaven, Germany, our world was suddenly turned upside down from a friendly voyage and people treating us real well to coming off a gangplank with U.S. armed guards all around us. Down the gangplank, cold, and remember, we're coming from Texas roughly, not too many months before where it was warm. So we go down the gangplank and then they load us on these GI 2.5-ton trucks with no canvas in the back. It's open, just a top, and we take a 50-mile ride from Bremerhaven, Germany down to Bremen, Germany. Of course, this whole country has been bombed out, and it was awesome. I mean, I just could not believe what I was seeing. So we got to Bremen, Germany, and I thought, okay, now we'll find a place to rest and what have you, and there they loaded us into boxcars. And in these boxcars, they sealed the doors shut, and for 3 days and 2 nights, or 2 nights and 3 days, we headed south to Ludwigsburg, Germany. And there we were taken off the train, and my mother was taken to one camp, and my brother and I and my father taken another camp, and I never seen my brother or father while I was at the other camp called Camp 76. It's a prison called Hohenasperg. And there we were put into cells, and I had no idea why we were in there. I kept trying to explain to the American soldiers that I was an American, and he would just say, "Shut up, you little Nazi, shut up. And if you're not good, we're going to hang you from this hangman's tree here in the courtyard." And he pointed that out to me, and so I learned to shut up. But I was still always trying to explain to him that I was an American. And then we had to walk with our hands on our head. We had to eat standing up, what little food there was. And then when you were thrown into your cell, actually you weren't thrown, but when you were put into your cell, they'd slam the door shut and then lock it. You could hear it being latched. And there I was for about 7 days until we were released, and then into Germany. We left that area and went up to northern Germany where my grandparents lived, and I was constantly in search of a way to get back to America. I wanted to go back to the land that I loved. And I met GIs. I went to places where it was really forbidden to go because there were different zones, and I almost froze to death, but I always had in mind to get back to the country. We arrived up there in Bremen, Germany, Delmenhorst, where my grandfather lives. We arrived there in like in March of '46. By December, I had applied at the consulate already for my passport. I have no idea why they didn't issue me my passport just then, but it was not issued until we came back to this country in December '47. All the time while I was in Germany, some 21 months, my goal was and my mission was to get back to this country. And that's all I focused on. And I did have some memories from people who treated me well on the ship. John Kincaid, my teacher in grade school in Brooklyn, New York, Mr. Brill, who'd always said, this is war, this will pass, keep your chin up and keep looking forward to whatever you're going to be doing. And so I had this constant goal of getting back to this country. I can remember that very well. Sometimes I'd get depressed and would almost give up, and then I would think about what these people had said and how good John Kincaid was to me on the ship going over. I mean, I have great memories of this man. In fact, just a year ago I visited him, and so I got to thank him personally for really saving my life, because it was his treatment of me that helped me keep my eyes on my goals of where I wanted to be and where I wanted to go. Throughout this time period, when I was from 10 to 11 to 12 to 13, 14, when I came back to this country, I was always focused on what I wanted to do and how I would do this. And then once I got back to this country, we went to Southwest Kansas, where Mr. Dreyer and Mrs. Dreyer took us in. They were farmers, wheat farmers. And this was another new experience for my brother and I. I mean, we came from city lights, and now we don't even see telephone poles or fence posts. So this became a new experience too, and I remember writing my mother a letter and saying, gee, I'm not so sure I made the right decision coming back here, because there's nothing out here but stars in the skies at night. There's no lights. But that eventually became my home, and I sort of made myself fit into the environment that I was in, and always, again, keeping my mind on what I'm going to do in the future. So it was 11 years after we came back before I seen my parents again. I didn't see my parents until 1958. We came back here in 1947. Most of my experiences inside the prisons, the internment camp in Crystal City and in Ellis Island and over in Germany in Hohenasperg, were always, how do I say this, were things that didn't drag me down. I kept focused on that I had to get out of this. Something here that's not right. I think my most stressful time was in the boxcar ride and then in the prison. Those two followed one right another. In the boxcar ride, this was midwinter, very cold. The GIs, American soldiers, were constantly yelling at us. Again, I tried to tell them I was an American. You don't have to talk to me in German or scream at me in German. During this boxcar ride, it was freezing weather. I mean, it was mid-January in Germany, and there was no heat in these boxcars. And I remember just crawling up into a fetal position on the floor and just trying to ignore my surroundings. And then every now and then the train would have to stop for water, and then they would let us go out and take latrine breaks. And they would say the women squat here and the men go on the other side, always under armed guard. And then back in the plane yelling at us in German like "Mach schnell," which means hurry up, you know, you little Krauts, get in here, and so on and so forth, and Nazis. And then when they took us to the prison, that prison has, the prison has lasted in my memory even to these years. It was a very frightening experience. In fact, I went back last year to visit the prison, and I got a key to my cell. And while I was there, being given a tour by the present director of the prison, who it's now in the German control, I kind of relived the experience, and I went to where the hangman's tree was. I went to my cell. I listened to the banging of the door cell so I could really get in my mind, this wasn't a dream. I often wondered, is this a dream? Was I imagining that this happening to me? But once I was there, I knew that everything was factual that was in my mind. In fact, even a few years before I went back, I got a book that was written by an Army corporal about the prison, and in that little booklet, he writes about the hangman's tree. And that, I mean, when this GI, this American soldier, told me, and I don't, I mean, I have no hate for this man. I mean, but when he told me that if I wasn't good, I'd be hung from that tree, let me tell you, I believed him. I had no doubt he was speaking the truth, and I did not want to be hung. So that was a very frightful experience, probably the most, although it didn't last very long, but one day in that hellhole would be bad enough. So how I got back to America, first of all, I went to work for the Army early on while I was there. I hitchhiked, put my thumb out, and of course American soldiers weren't used to that because Germans don't hitchhike this way. And so he figured, well, this has got to be some strange guy here. So he slammed on his brakes in his 3/4-ton weapons carrier and picked me up and asked me who I was and so on. I told him I was from America and that I had been interned and came over here and so on and so forth. And at that time I was sort of feeling sorry for myself, but in the back of the weapons carrier was Johnny the Czech. He had been to like Buchenwald, to a Nazi concentration camp, showed me his tattoo, and so I felt, boy, and his parents, he doesn't know where his parents are, so that was a upbeat point for me, knowing that I didn't have it so bad. So I went to work for the soldiers, for the American Army, the Graves Registration, and then eventually I got me another job, which was over in Bremen, Germany, which is an American enclave. And there I went to work in the motor pool for the Counterintelligence Corps, the Army Counterintelligence Corps. I wasn't an agent, I was just filling up vehicles with gasoline, checking oil, and that sort of thing. And one day, while I was in the motor pool, Mrs. Mary Simmons came up to me and said, how come I wasn't in school? And she spoke to me in German. I said, oh, ma'am, I'm an American. You can speak to me in English. She said, well, then you doubly should be in school. And she wanted to know if I wanted to go to school. And I said, no, I like working here. And I said, but my brother, he likes school, so maybe he would go. So she began to teach him in school, homeschool, and for that he babysitted for that family. And then she wanted to know if I wanted to come back to America, and I said, of course. So she said, well, she'll see what she can do about that. So she knew Art and Mildred Dreyer in southwest Kansas, who owned a big ranch. And so she wrote them and asked them if we could come back, and still had difficulty getting my passport, but she took care of that at the consulate when we went back down there. Anyhow, she knew these Dryers, so the Dryers put up the money for the boat fare to get us back, and the rest is history. In October we got on the ship, and in November we landed in New York, and then eventually we took the milk train from New York. Well, actually from New York to Kansas City was a sort of a fast train. From Kansas City on down to Garden City, Kansas was a milk train, and that's how we got there. Now, one of the questions is that how did all this happen? Well, it happened because I persisted in telling people I was an American, I needed an American passport to get back, and that sort of thing. And that wasn't always easy. As I talk in my book, you know, it took Mrs. Simmons to get the consulate off their duff to give us our passport. And they should have given me my passport, my brother's passport, in December '46 when I applied. I don't know why. I had a difficult time proving to people I was an American. Very difficult. I remember a case when I went into a barracks where you really don't belong, and this GI had a cigarette lighter, and it didn't work, and I told him he needed more benzene, and he said, oh, you aren't an American, you're a little kraut, you know, because that's what Germans call gasoline, benzene. But I told him, I said, that's an American word. Benzene is also a lighter fluid, but he didn't know that, and I just ran out of there, and I eventually had to get called on the carpet by the chief of the military police to tell me not to do what I'm supposed to do, and so on and so forth, and stay out of these areas where I was forbidden. You see, when I went to Bremen, I always went over there illegally, and there was a catwalk bridge where the bridge was out, and these German workers would go across and show their badges or whatever they had, and I would just kind of flip mine, whatever I had, and hopefully they wouldn't catch me. And they didn't. I made that trip over and back successfully many days, and into the American zone. And that's how come I got to the work for the CIC. First of all, my upbringing. My parents, and I remember the officials telling my parents, to be interned is nothing to be ashamed of. It just happens during war, and my parents told me that. So I had no guilt feelings or shame for being interned. It was one of those things that happened during war. My mother and father told me. I heard the officials tell my mother and father that. So that's one way that I had nothing to be, we weren't guilty. My father was as American as anybody else's father was, except he didn't have his citizenship papers, is the only difference. But my brother and I were both born in this country, and we were Americans. We worked on the war effort and that sort of thing. So we had nothing to be ashamed of. And then I remember Mr. Brill, that was my school teacher when I left New York to go to internment camp, telling me, you know, this too will pass, and things will get better. So don't let this get you down. And then John Kincaid on the SS Aiken Victory, the ship that took us over there to Germany, he was another fellow that treated us so well. In fact, he gave my brother a jacket because we hardly had any winter clothes. I was really jealous of my brother's jacket, but it was too big for me, and my brother could wear it. And I remember how well I felt like that this was like a prisoner's last supper when we got off the ship. But I always remember how well John Kincaid treated us. So when I would get depressed, I would think about John Kincaid and I would think about Mr. Brill. What would they do in this situation? And they would say, well, don't give up, don't give up. I remember once almost giving up in town in Bremen, Germany, when I kept waiting in line, and it was this theater and people, it was Americans, for Americans only. Of course, I was American, but I didn't have an ID card. You see, that there's a difference. They were dependents and that sort of thing. And so I remember almost laying down on the ground and saying, look, I'm going to go to sleep here and just freeze to death. But I fell short of doing that. I decided to go home. I stomped my feet until they could get warm and went back to where I lived, you know, back across that catwalk bridge. So I always had this hope in my mind from people that were good to me, and then the American soldiers that were so good to us too. I don't remember them all by name, but they were good to us. And then, of course, when I met the Simmons, by that time we were getting close to coming home, and things were looking up when we finally got word that everything was approved. We got our passport. The interesting thing about this is that I have a very vivid memory of my voyage to Germany when we went in '46, and when we came back in October '47. I have hardly any memory of the voyage, because the voyage wasn't significant to me. What was significant is when we got into New York Harbor and seen the Statue of Liberty. And then there were like German kids who were refugees coming to this country. And I remember they shunned me, and I had no love for them, because I was an American and they were German. But there's a little bit of ego there, I think. Not in a negative sense, but in a sense that I was very proud to be an American, and still am. This is my country. Don't ever give up hope. No matter how someone treats you, there is hope. There is a way to do this. I mean, I've been in a constant battle with 25 years now with the government about this internment issue. They provided a bill for Japanese Americans, and they didn't provide anything for German Americans, which is unconstitutional. But I've been told by the courts and by senators and congressmen and the media that it's different, but it's not. They're all the same. So I constantly have hope. I think hope is important, and I think you have to have a mission, and then at the end, that mission has to have a goal or goals that you set out to achieve. I mean, if you, for example, I've started on this research project on my internment over 25 years ago now. Well, maybe just 25 years ago. There's been a lot of people join me in this fight, and there's a lot of them that dropped off this train as we go along, because it seemed like a never-ending process. But I'm still at it, and I'm going to be at it as long as I have a mind and I'm able to do it, because it's the right thing to do. You know, when I was in high school, people would say I would argue with a signpost. I'd say, yeah, I would if it's wrong. And then I would take it to the proper authorities. But I think you have to have an end point that you're seeking, and you'll run into a lot of obstacles, but you got to overcome those obstacles. There's like the hurdles on a racetrack. You got to get over the top of them, and sometimes you're going to knock a few down, and sometimes they're going to knock you down. But you get back up.